He built his empire on control, routes, rules, loyalty. But that night, the Mafia boss walked into a trap designed by someone who knew him better than his own men. A waitress handed him a note, and with one sentence, everything collapsed. "Your girlfriend sold you out." They're in position. Suddenly, he wasn't a hunter. He was the target. The killers weren't rushing. They were waiting. Because the plan wasn't just to kill him, it was to make him understand who betrayed him as he ran for his life. The night the city decided to swallow Luca Moretti, it dressed itself in velvet and warm light. La Senorina sat on the old harbor like a jewel pinned to a dark coat, polished enough to look innocent from the street. Inside, amber lamps softened faces, mirrors multiplied chandeliers, and music was chosen for one purpose, to make dangerous men feel unhurried. Luca arrived without spectacle, because spectacle was for the insecure. He wore a tailored coat, plain shoes, and the calm posture of someone who did not fear rooms. Rooms feared him. The maitre d' smiled too quickly, the bartender wiped a glass a second time, and two businessmen at the bar lowered their voices as if the air itself carried Luca's name. Neutral ground was a myth, but it was a useful one. Luca allowed it to exist when it served him. Tonight it served someone else. Serafina Valente slid into the booth beside him with the ease of a woman who had practiced being wanted. Her perfume carried citrus and smoke, expensive and faintly aggressive. She kissed his cheek with the same rhythm she used on cameras and donors, a gesture that looked intimate and weighed nothing. Luca registered the small details he always registered, the cold trapped in her sleeves, the way her eyes scanned the room before settling on him, the quick glance toward the entrance reflected in the bar mirror. He did not comment. He did not accuse. He did what kept him alive. He let her speak. Serafina liked to paint ordinary evenings into stories, making dinner feel like a scene and Luca feel like a man whose life could still be narrated. Luca nodded at the right moments, smiled just enough to keep her comfortable, and listened for the places where her rhythm stuttered. Comfort made people careless. Carelessness made truth leak. The waitress arrived with water before they ordered. She was young, but not in the bright way youth often looked. Her hair was pinned tight, her uniform immaculate, and her movements were careful as if she lived inside rules she did not trust. She set the glasses down with hands that were steady, yet her breathing carried a faint unevenness, like someone who had run and then pretended she had not. Luca watched her the way he watched contracts, for the hidden clause. When she returned with bread, the basket touched the table softly. In the same instant her fingers brushed Luca's knuckles, and a folded scrap of paper slid into his palm. The contact was so brief it could be mistaken for accident, but Luca knew accidents did not choose his hand. The waitress did not linger, did not look at him, did not betray relief. She moved away as if nothing had happened, as if she had never existed. Luca kept his face unchanged. He adjusted his napkin, covering the paper, and waited. Waiting was a weapon. He watched Serafina's mouth curve as she spoke, watched the way she leaned in, watched the slight tension in her jaw when her gaze drifted again toward the mirror. He watched the room. The man near the restroom corridor pretended to scroll on his phone but never looked at the screen. The couple by the window leaned back in perfect unison, clearing a line of sight. The bartender paused mid-polish, and the glass in his hand stopped moving as if time itself had hesitated. Under the table's shadow, Luca unfolded the note. It carried one sentence, printed in hurried block letters. It warned that his girlfriend had sold him out, and that the people who meant to strike were already placed to do it. No signature. No explanation. No promise of safety. Luca refolded and held it as if it were a receipt. He did not let his pulse change. A man who reacted openly in this world did not live long enough to learn better. He considered the possibilities without emotion. The note could be true, a desperate warning from someone inside the trap. It could be false, bait meant to make him act and reveal himself. It could be both, truth delivered by a hand that still served another master. The only reliable answer was the room itself. Luca had built his reputation on restraint. Men with tempers died early, and men with pride died publicly. He stayed alive by moving slowly and thinking faster than the people who hated him. In his world, money was not the goal, money was the water that let power grow roots. He controlled shipping contracts that looked legitimate, unions that looked loyal, and a network of accountants who could erase a fortune into clean numbers by morning. Police officers avoided his neighborhoods because the complaints vanished. Rival crews avoided his docks because their boats stopped floating. Luca did not need to announce himself, because the city already spoke his language. La Senorina was one of the places that system touched without owning. Its owner paid for protection but also paid for distance, the way a man paid taxes and prayed not to be noticed. Luca respected that arrangement because it made business easier. When rivals needed to talk, they preferred a room that belonged to no one. Neutrality let enemies pretend they were civilized. Tonight Serafina wore a dark dress that made her look effortless, but Luca noticed the details she could not hide, the way she held her shoulders when she was trying not to show nerves, the way she kept her hands visible, and the careful way she watched the entrance in the mirrors. He scanned the reflections again. Near the entrance, two men shared a table and barely touched their drinks. Their eyes moved too often to be casual. One of them wore a watch that looked too expensive for his posture. Another man lingered by the coat rack, pretending to read the wine list posted on the wall, but his head never tilted close enough to read it. On the far side of the room, a waiter carried plates with the careful speed of someone performing under pressure, then disappeared through a door and did not return. Luca's own protection was present, but not obvious. A man at the bar with salt and pepper hair watched the room through the mirror and sipped water instead of whiskey. A woman near the window pretended to eat alone while her attention never left Luca's booth. They would not start a fight inside La Senorina unless Luca ordered it. Their job was to keep him alive without making the restaurant bleed. The note changed the calculation. The note suggested blood was already priced into the night. When Luca folded the paper again, his mind ran through the simplest scenario first, an ambush meant to end his leadership and scatter his organization. That kind of ambush required surprise, a controlled exit, and a reason to make Luca stay still long enough to be struck. Serafina was that reason. If she had sold him, she would keep him seated with affection, keep him talking, keep him from noticing the room closing. Serafina reached across the table and brushed Luca's wrist, her nails light on his skin. She smiled as if the touch was casual. The touch was not casual. It was anchoring. She wanted his hand on the table where eyes could see it, wanted his posture relaxed, wanted his attention tied to her face. Luca allowed it. He let her think the leash was working. He watched the waitress again as she passed the bar. Her eyes stayed forward, but her shoulders were tight, and her hands kept touching the edge of her apron as if checking that something was still there. She moved like someone counting steps. Luca recognized that kind of movement from his own people before a job. Preparation made the body rigid. The man by the restroom corridor shifted his weight toward Luca's booth. The couple by the window angled their chairs, opening their bodies toward the aisle. The bartender placed the polished glass down and reached beneath the counter. Serafina's smile stayed bright, but her breathing grew slightly shallow, barely noticeable unless you watched her closely. She was waiting for the moment the net snapped. Luca did not give her that moment. He created his own. He let the conversation continue while he examined his surroundings as if he were simply bored. He noted the placement of knives on nearby tables, the density of people between him and each exit, the distance to the kitchen door, and the angle of the mirrors. Luca saw one man at the bar watching Serafina instead of Luca, as if checking her for a signal. That confirmed the betrayal more cleanly than the note ever could. Luca's hand slid to the inside seam of his jacket where a small transmitter was stitched into the lining like a secret. He pressed it twice with precise timing. A coded pulse would reach the nearest loyal team, hostile environment, plan compromised, extraction needed. He kept his shoulders relaxed, kept his gaze on Serafina, kept the performance smooth. If she had sold him, she would be watching for disruption. Luca gave her none. The waitress passed again along the aisle, and Luca lifted his gaze and caught hers for a heartbeat. He gave no thanks, no plea, only a question made of stillness. The waitress flinched in the smallest way and glanced toward the kitchen door before forcing her face back into blank professionalism. Luca understood. The strike would not only come from the dining room. It would come from behind, from the places guests did not watch. Luca pressed his transmitter again, not as an alarm but as a directive. His team would not rush in. They would reposition, cut off exits, and prepare to pull him out through a route that did not look like escape. Luca had taught them to treat public spaces like theaters. He smiled at Serafina and reached for his water glass without drinking. The motion was a rehearsal of trust, a lie offered to keep her calm. He set the glass down and leaned back, posture loose, eyes half-lidded as if he were relaxing into the evening. In reality his muscles were coiled and ready, and his mind was already walking through every possible second that came next. Outside, engines started and stopped with careful restraint. Inside, La Senorina kept its music low and its lights warm, as if the building itself wanted to pretend this was just another evening. Luca Moretti sat under amber light with a warning folded in his palm and a woman beside him who smiled like a lover and watched like a handler. He did not stand yet. He did not rush. He let the trap tighten, because traps revealed their structure when they believed the prey had accepted it. The shift from ordinary to lethal happened without sound, like a curtain drawn across a stage. Serafina kept talking as if nothing had changed, but Luca felt the room tighten. It was not paranoia, it was pattern recognition. Chairs angled. Feet repositioned. Lines of sight cleared. The man by the restroom corridor stopped pretending to scroll and let his phone hang loosely at his side, as if he no longer cared whether anyone noticed him. The couple by the window leaned back again, their bodies opening a corridor between tables. Behind the bar the bartender's shoulders rose and fell with a slow breath that looked calm and felt rehearsed. Luca remained seated. He let the net believe it was holding him. He watched Serafina's face in the mirror, the way she smiled at him while watching the entrance. Her attention was split into two tracks, the way an actor listened for cues. Once, her fingers brushed her clutch bag, and Luca saw the smallest movement of her thumb along the clasp, as if confirming an object inside. He filed it away. She was either armed or carrying a signal. The waitress crossed the aisle again, and Luca noted the slight tremor in her shoulders. She was afraid, but not of him. Her fear came from people who had already given instructions. She paused near a side station, lifted a tray, and in that movement Luca caught a glimpse of her wrist. A faint bruise ringed it, fresh enough to be purple. Someone had handled her roughly, recently, to ensure compliance. Luca's patience hardened into purpose. He pressed his transmitter once more, a subtle pulse meant to update his team's route. He did not want them charging in. He wanted them cutting the perimeter, blocking vehicles, and creating noise in the wrong place to draw attention away from his exit. The best rescue looked like coincidence. Serafina leaned closer, her eyes bright. She touched Luca's wrist again, this time with a firmer hold. Luca let her. He allowed his body language to remain loose. He gave her the illusion that she still had control. Then he stood, smoothly, as if he were simply stretching or preparing to excuse himself. The room paused. The trap relied on stillness. Movement forced recalculation. Serafina rose with him too quickly, and Luca felt the tension in her hand. He stepped sideways, breaking her grip without force, guiding her hand away with the same gentle precision he used to move chess pieces. Her smile remained, but the muscles around her mouth tightened. Luca angled toward the restroom corridor, offering the simplest narrative, a man leaving the table. The blocker near the corridor shifted immediately to intercept, stepping into the path with a casual posture that did not match his eyes. Luca changed direction without hesitation and moved toward the bar instead, forcing the blocker to pivot. In that brief moment, the couple by the window adjusted again, and Luca saw one of them slide a hand beneath the table. The waitress moved into Luca's path, almost colliding with him. The contact looked accidental, but it was too well timed. Her shoulder brushed his coat, and a thin card pressed into his palm. Luca closed his fingers around it without looking down. The waitress kept moving, eyes fixed forward, but her breathing had quickened. Luca knew she had just chosen a side in a war she could not control. Behind him, Serafina followed, close enough that he could feel the heat of her body. Luca's instincts screamed that she wanted him within arm's reach when the first strike came. He let her follow. He led her toward the kitchen door, because kitchens had exits and because men who planned ambushes often forgot that service routes were built for urgency. He swiped the card at the kitchen door reader. The light flashed green and the lock clicked. Luca stepped through as if he belonged. Heat, steam, and stainless steel hit him like a wave. The kitchen staff froze in a way real staff never froze. Two men in cook jackets stood too still, their hands hovering near blades that were not positioned for chopping. A third figure near the back door held a pistol low, angled toward the floor. They all recognized Luca at once. Recognition in that world was always followed by violence. Luca moved first. He yanked a metal prep table sideways with all his weight, sending it skidding into one man's legs. The man stumbled and dropped his knife. Luca used the opening to lunge toward the back, grabbing a hanging pan rack and ripping it downward. Pans clattered to the floor, noise exploding through the room, turning choreography into chaos. A shot cracked, deafening in the enclosed space. Metal sparked. Luca felt the heat of a bullet pass close enough to disturb the air beside his ribs. He did not slow. He shoved a swinging door open and slipped into a narrow corridor behind the kitchen, where boxes of produce and cleaning supplies were stacked high. The corridor smelled of bleach and onions. Another shot hit the wall behind him and left a bright scar in paint. Luca sprinted toward the back exit. The door was already being pulled inward from the other side, as if someone had anticipated his escape. Luca slammed his shoulder into it at the same time, forcing it wider. Cold night air surged in. He slipped through and landed in a service alley slick with winter moisture. The alley was lit by a single harsh lamp. At the far end, a van idled with headlights off. Two silhouettes moved toward him, careful and quick. Behind him, the kitchen door burst open, and men poured out into the alley, weapons raised. Luca judged distances. The van ahead meant capture or death. The men behind meant death. He looked up. A rusted fire escape ladder climbed the brick wall. It was narrow, unstable, and exposed, but it led upward, and upward was the one direction ambushers hated. Luca jumped, grabbed the cold metal, and hauled himself up. The ladder shuddered under his weight. A shot rang out below, and the ladder vibrated with impact. Luca climbed faster, hands burning with friction, boots scraping. He reached the first platform and pulled himself up, then climbed again. His shoulders ached. His breath remained controlled. Years of violence had trained him to breathe through pain and keep his mind clear. A second shot cracked, and a bullet chipped brick near his head. Luca did not look down. Looking down was for men who still imagined second chances. At the roofline, Luca vaulted onto the rooftop and rolled to break momentum. Wind hit his face hard, sharp and cleansing. The city spread out below, dark water, distant sirens, lights scattered like coins. For a heartbeat, he was alone. Then he saw the figure by the rooftop vent. The man was not one of the kitchen attackers. His stance was too relaxed, his weapon held with a professional stillness. He had the posture of someone who expected Luca to appear exactly where he had appeared. The gun tracked Luca's movement but did not fire immediately. That hesitation carried meaning. Behind Luca, the rooftop access door slammed open. Two more men emerged, coats too thin, eyes too cold. They moved with confidence, not panic, as if their positions had been rehearsed on maps. Serafina stepped out behind them a moment later, and the sight of her on the roof clarified everything. She had not been left behind in the restaurant. She had followed the operation. She was not a frightened girlfriend caught in crossfire. She was part of the mechanism. Her face was calm. Her posture was composed. She looked at Luca the way a person looked at a problem that was finally being solved. Luca felt no dramatic heartbreak. He felt the quiet hardening of a truth he had avoided. In his world, affection was often used as camouflage. He had known that. He had simply chosen to forget it when Serafina smiled at him in the mornings. The men began to close in. Luca moved toward the HVAC unit for cover. A shot cracked and struck concrete where his head had been. He slid behind metal housing and listened. Footsteps separated into angles. They were trying to triangulate him. They wanted him boxed, not only dead. Below, engines shifted again. Sirens rose and then faded as if redirected. Someone was controlling the city's response. Luca used the reflection of a nearby skylight to watch the flanker without exposing himself. The vent gunman moved left, the two from the door moved right, and Serafina stayed back near the door, safe and visible, as if she wanted Luca to know she was watching. Luca's mind moved through options. He had no gun in his hands. He had only speed, timing, and the willingness to jump into uncertainty. He scanned the roof's edges and saw the neighboring building, slightly lower, its roof close enough to tempt and far enough to punish. He waited for the moment their attention aligned. A loose piece of gravel near his cover shifted when wind hit it. One man's gun tracked the sound reflexively. Luca exploded into motion, sprinting across wet concrete toward the far edge. Shots cracked behind him. He did not slow. At the edge, the gap yawned. Luca jumped. For a fraction of a second, he floated. Then his hands hit the neighboring ledge. Pain shot through his shoulders. His body swung, feet kicking air. He grunted silently, teeth clenched, and hauled himself upward with brute control. He rolled onto the neighboring roof and moved immediately, not allowing relief. On the first roof, men rushed to the edge. Serafina remained back, framed by the roof access door, watching as if she were reading an ending. Luca spotted a rooftop stairwell door on the neighboring building. A keypad sat beside it, and a small card reader glowed faintly. He pulled the keycard the waitress had given him and swiped it. The light flashed green again. The door clicked open. That was not luck. That was planning. Luca stepped into the stairwell, descending into darkness, knowing that the waitress had not simply helped him escape. She had guided him toward something prepared. He did not know whether the preparation was for his rescue or his capture. As he descended, Luca kept one hand on the rail and the other near his jacket seam, ready to pulse his signal again if he found a window. Concrete walls swallowed sound, but his mind stayed sharp with calculation. The betrayal was meant to feel personal, meant to turn strategy into rage. Luca refused the gift and treated it as data. Serafina trusted the men on the roof to control him, which meant she believed reinforcements would keep arriving to close every gap. The warning note returned with heavier meaning. In position did not only mean guns in hands. It meant assets placed in advance, keycards seated, doors primed, routes chosen. Someone had studied Luca's habits, predicted his likely escape vectors, and built a funnel that could redirect him from dining room to kitchen to alley to rooftop to stairwell. That level of preparation required money, intelligence access, and patience. It required someone close enough to know which restaurants he visited and which exits he favored. Serafina could provide intimacy, not infrastructure. Luca pictured a broker in the background, someone who rented police response times and bought surveillance feeds. Marco Santori's name surfaced in Luca's mind with icy clarity. Luca had avoided Santori's orbit for years. Now the orbit had pulled him in anyway. He paused at the next landing, listened for pursuit, then continued downward, choosing movement over doubt. The night was no longer about surviving an ambush. It was about discovering who had written the script. For him, /. The stairwell narrowed as Luca descended, and the air changed from restaurant warmth to underground coolness. Each landing felt older than the one above it, as if the building stored different decades in different floors. The door at the bottom opened into a hallway lined with utility panels and storage closets. The lighting was dim and practical, designed for maintenance work, not comfort. Luca stepped out and let the door close softly behind him, then held still to listen. Sound traveled strangely here. He heard a distant hum of electricity, the faint sigh of vents, and a soft thud that might have been a door closing somewhere deeper. Someone was in the building. The rooftop attackers had expected him to come this way, and that meant pursuit could appear from above at any moment. Luca moved, but he moved with restraint, keeping close to the wall, avoiding the center of the corridor where footsteps echoed. He passed a junction where a painted arrow pointed toward what looked like an emergency exit. The paint was fresh. That detail did not belong in an old corridor. Fresh paint meant recent attention, recent planning. Luca followed the direction not because he trusted it, but because refusing it would be its own form of obedience. He wanted to see what his enemies believed he would do. A heavy door waited at the end of the corridor, marked with a small sign that suggested maintenance. Luca tested the handle. It was locked. A keypad blinked beside it, and beneath the keypad a small card reader glowed. Luca swiped the waitress's keycard again. The reader accepted it instantly, and the door clicked open with the smooth sound of a system designed to cooperate. Inside was a small room with bare walls, a table, 2 chairs, and a single overhead light that cast hard shadows. The room felt too clean, too deliberate, like a set built to create pressure. On the table lay a sealed envelope and a phone. The phone's screen was dark, but it sat centered as if it wanted to be noticed. Luca did not touch anything immediately. He scanned corners, ceiling, vents, and the seams where walls met. The absence of obvious cameras meant nothing. The best surveillance was the kind hidden inside fixtures. The room's purpose was clear, to make him feel alone and observed at the same time. He opened the envelope with careful fingers. Inside was a photograph printed on glossy paper. It showed Serafina beside Marco Santori, their heads angled close in a way that suggested familiarity rather than business. Behind them Luca recognized an upscale lounge he knew Serafina had claimed she had never visited. The timestamp in the corner was recent. The photograph was not meant to prove a point to Luca, it was meant to break the last thread of denial. Another sheet rested beneath the photo, typed in clean, impersonal lines. It summarized the betrayal without emotion, dates, locations, transfers, access points. It described how Serafina had delivered information gradually, never too much at once, never enough to trigger sudden suspicion, always with the patience of someone watering a plant that would bloom into disaster. At the bottom, the message shifted from accounting to choice. It offered Luca a path to stay alive, but only if he accepted guidance. Luca felt the trap's teeth. The paper was not just information. It was an invitation to surrender control. The phone vibrated once, a soft buzz on wood. Luca watched it. He imagined a watcher behind glass somewhere, someone waiting for him to reach for the device and play the role they expected, the betrayed man desperate for answers. Luca refused. He picked up the phone, examined it for a tracking mark or a hidden switch, then powered it off and set it back down. He would not let strangers measure his breathing through a call line. He searched the room instead. Under the table, a small panel sat slightly ajar. Luca knelt, pried it open, and found a compact metal box bolted inside. A biometric lock blinked a calm green. The box was too new for an old building, too carefully installed to be random. Luca yanked it hard, ripping screws from the wall. The lock beeped in protest. He slammed the casing against the table edge until metal bent and seams split. Wires spilled out. Luca tore through them until the device died. Inside, a small transmitter lay nested in foam, the kind used to jam signals or tag a target's location. The people who built this room had not only wanted him here, they wanted him unable to call for help once he arrived. Luca pocketed the transmitter anyway. Dead devices still held information. A sound came from the corridor, soft and quick. Footsteps. Luca moved to the side of the door and waited, body aligned to strike if necessary. The door opened, and the waitress slipped in, fast enough to avoid noise, careful enough to avoid being seen. Her apron was gone now. Her hair was looser. Her eyes were the eyes of someone trained to evaluate threats. She froze when she saw Luca already standing in shadow. In an instant her hand moved, and a small blade appeared, angled low. Luca stepped forward, caught her wrist, and rotated it just enough to break the attack line without injuring her. The blade fell and clinked on the floor. Luca released her wrist and backed half a step, giving space without granting trust. The waitress's breathing was controlled, but her gaze flicked to the broken metal box and then to the dead transmitter in Luca's hand. Her expression tightened, not with fear of Luca, but with anger at the plan being disrupted. She had wanted him contained in that room. She had wanted him guided by the paper and the phone. Luca had rewritten the scene. She crouched and retrieved the blade. Luca let her. Allowing her to arm herself was another form of control. It forced her to decide what she wanted more, survival or mission. She slipped the blade away and turned, moving back toward the corridor with urgent certainty. Luca followed. He did not follow because he trusted her. He followed because she was the only map he had, and because maps were valuable even when drawn by enemies. They moved deeper, descending another stairwell that opened behind a utility door. The building changed around them. The walls became thicker. Doors became heavier. The air grew cooler and drier, smelling of metal and seawater, as if the underground connected to old tunnels near the docks. Luca recognized the design of places built to hide, reinforced corners, sound-dampening panels, hidden conduits for cables. They reached a security gate with a camera mounted above it. The waitress held her badge to a reader. The gate opened with a motorized hum, and they stepped into a wider corridor lined with black panels. The lighting was low, the kind that kept faces indistinct. At the end, a set of double doors waited. The waitress opened them, and Luca stepped into a room that made his stomach tighten. Monitors covered the walls, dozens of screens showing different streets, different rooftops, different interiors. Maps glowed with moving dots. Files were open on terminals. A bank of radios hissed with encrypted chatter. This was not a safe house. It was a command center. One screen displayed La Senorina's dining room from above. Luca's booth was empty now. Men moved through the restaurant, searching, their motions quick and annoyed. Another screen showed the rooftop where Luca had jumped, with figures clustered near the edge. Serafina stood near the roof access door, framed by light, her posture calm. She looked down as if expecting Luca to be hauled back up or dragged away. A third screen showed Marco Santori's black sedan parked 2 blocks away. Santori sat inside with a stillness, as if waiting for confirmation. Serafina appeared on another camera angle, leaving the restaurant and walking toward the sedan, smoothing her hair, her face composed like a woman approaching a reward. The waitress moved to a console and began typing with speed. Luca watched her hands. They did not belong to service work. They belonged to someone who spent days navigating systems. Luca's eyes caught something else, a file open on one monitor with his name at the top. Under it were locations and numbers that made his jaw tighten. Safe houses. Routes. Names connected to his men's families. Information he had never written down in one place. The betrayal was bigger than Serafina. Serafina was an access point. This command center was the machine. Luca felt a cold calm settle over him, heavier now because it carried clarity. He had been surviving, yes, but he had also been allowed to survive. A system that could watch this much could decide when a man like Luca lived and when he disappeared. The waitress's eyes flicked to Luca, searching his face for reaction. She expected rage or collapse. Luca gave her neither. He gave her attention, the kind that made people feel seen and vulnerable. On a wall map, Luca saw a pattern of dots moving toward the docks. His people. Someone was hurting them. The system was shaping the night around him, not reacting. Luca reached into his pocket, pulled out the dead transmitter, and placed it on the console beside the waitress's keyboard. He then pulled out Serafina's photograph and laid it flat. He did not need proof, but he wanted to show he understood the game. The waitress's mouth tightened. Luca scanned the room for exits and counted armed guards. He saw 2 men near the far door wearing earpieces. He saw a third leaning against a wall, posture relaxed, weapon concealed. The command center did not look like a police unit, and it did not look like a rival crew. It looked like something funded, something that believed it could operate above consequences. Luca did not speak. Speaking was unnecessary. He moved toward a side terminal and glanced at the open interface. Names scrolled, including corrupt officials, shipping schedules, and surveillance keys. He understood the machine's purpose. It sold certainty. It sold positioning. It sold the ability to make a city bend. The waitress stepped between Luca and the terminal, blocking his view with her body. She raised one hand in a sharp, silent warning. Luca met her eyes and held them. He wanted to know whether she had tried to help him out of pity or whether she had been ordered to funnel him into this room. Her gaze told him the truth. She was not here to rescue him. She was here to use him. Luca turned slightly, watching the monitors again. On the screen with Santori's sedan, Serafina leaned toward the driver's window, her posture confident. Another figure stepped out behind her, moving too close. Serafina's confidence flickered for the first time, a crack in her performance. Luca understood. Betrayal did not earn safety. It earned a shorter leash. The command center continued to hum around him, data flowing like blood. Luca felt the weight of choice press on his shoulders. If he fought here, he would die. If he surrendered, he would become a tool. If he escaped, he would carry knowledge that could collapse this machine, but only if he stayed alive long enough to use it. He chose escape. He began to move, not abruptly, but with the slow confidence of someone accepting a deal. He let the guards relax by pretending he was aligning with the room. He allowed the waitress to believe he would follow her lead. Then he watched for the moment her attention shifted to the monitors, the instant her hands paused over the keyboard. Luca's body coiled. The next seconds would decide whether he returned to his city as its master or vanished into someone else's system forever. Luca waited for an opening the way divers waited for a gap between waves. The command center's power came from information, and information required attention. Attention, even in trained people, always slipped for a moment. The waitress turned toward a bank of monitors, fingers tapping keys, pulling feeds and files. The guard near the far door shifted his stance, rolling his shoulders as if loosening tension. Another guard leaned slightly toward a radio, listening to a clipped burst of chatter. Luca watched their eyes, the micro-movements that revealed where their minds were. He moved as if he were complying, stepping closer to the console with slow acceptance. His posture suggested surrender, and surrender relaxed people because it confirmed their story. The waitress's gaze softened a fraction, not with kindness, but with satisfaction. She believed she had delivered him. She believed the machine had won. Luca's hand slid over the edge of the console and found the dead transmitter he had placed there. He lifted it casually, as if considering it. With the same motion, he shifted his weight and dropped the transmitter to the floor. The guard's eyes flicked down reflexively at the sound of metal against tile. In that instant, Luca struck. He drove his elbow into the guard's throat with controlled force, not to kill, but to collapse. The guard folded, choking silently. Luca caught the man's falling body and used it as cover, pulling the guard's concealed weapon free in one smooth motion. He did not raise the gun. He did not fire. A gunshot would turn the room into a slaughterhouse. Luca needed confusion, not noise. The waitress spun, blade flashing in her hand. Luca pivoted behind the collapsing guard and used the body as a moving shield. The second guard reached for his weapon. Luca stepped forward and slammed the first guard's body into him, driving him backward into a wall of monitors. Screens cracked. Sparks spat. The room's glow fractured, and for a second the command center looked like it was bleeding light. The radios hissed louder as feeds stuttered. Dots on maps froze. The machine's heartbeat skipped. Luca sprinted toward the side door he had noted earlier. It had a keypad and card reader. He grabbed the waitress's keycard from the console as he passed. She lunged after him, fast and furious, but Luca had already moved through the doorway. The corridor beyond was narrow and dark. Luca swiped the keycard at the reader and pushed through a second gate. Behind him, alarms began to pulse in low tones, not screaming, but insistent. The machine had realized it was being challenged. Footsteps pounded behind Luca. He ran. He followed the route the waitress had used earlier, descending through reinforced hallways that smelled of metal and salt. He heard doors slamming behind him. He heard a radio burst, then the quick thud of boots turning corners. The command center had guards trained for containment. Luca had been trained for escape. At a junction, Luca turned left instead of right, choosing a path that was not marked. He trusted his instincts in the building's architecture. Places like this always had redundancy, secondary exits, maintenance tunnels. The walls bore faint scuff marks near one panel, evidence of frequent use. Luca pried the panel open and found a narrow service crawlspace behind it. He squeezed through, moving on hands and knees. The space smelled of dust and old wiring. His shoulders scraped metal. He forced himself forward, using pain as fuel. Behind him, voices did not follow, but footsteps did, and he imagined the guards spreading, searching for access points. The crawlspace ended at a hatch. Luca pushed it up and emerged into a small mechanical room. Pipes ran along the ceiling. A fan hummed. A door stood to one side with a push bar. Luca shoved it open. He stepped into a concrete stairwell that rose toward street level. He climbed fast, taking steps two at a time, keeping his breathing quiet. At the top, he eased the exit door open and looked out. He was in the lower level of a parking structure. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air smelled of exhaust and damp cement. The structure was mostly empty, but two vehicles sat near the far wall, and Luca immediately recognized one as not belonging, a black sedan with tinted windows idling without a driver visible. Surveillance. He moved along the pillars, using them as cover, and scanned for his people. If his signal had reached them, they would be hunting him as aggressively as his enemies were. Luca reached into his jacket seam and pressed the transmitter sequence again, this time a short burst meant to share location without revealing it to anyone scanning ordinary frequencies. A shape moved near the ramp, and Luca's muscles tensed. Two people stepped into view. They wore coats and moved like ordinary citizens, but their eyes were trained, and their hands stayed near their waists. Luca recognized them as his own. They saw him and adjusted instantly, closing distance while scanning for threats. Relief did not show on their faces. Relief was a luxury. They gave him space to move without crowding him, forming a loose protective triangle. The black sedan across the structure shifted. Its headlights flared for a moment, then dimmed. Someone inside had noticed the reunion. Luca's people guided him toward their SUV parked near the exit. Luca moved quickly, staying low, eyes on the sedan. The sedan rolled forward, slow, almost lazy, but its direction was clear: interception. Luca's people opened the SUV door. Luca slid inside. The engine roared to life, and the vehicle surged forward, cutting left instead of heading directly out, using pillars to block line of sight. The sedan accelerated. Tires squealed faintly. The SUV shot up the ramp, burst into street noise, and merged into traffic. Luca watched the rear window. The sedan followed for 2 blocks, then peeled away, not wanting a chase that would attract police attention. That restraint meant the system still believed it could catch Luca later. It believed it had time. Time was something Luca planned to steal. He leaned forward between the front seats and rebuilt his situation from fragments. The machine had eyes, but eyes needed orientation. Luca listed the cameras he knew existed near his usual routes and the ones he suspected were newly tapped. He marked intersections that would be watched for obvious escapes, then chose alternatives that looked inconvenient to ordinary drivers. He instructed his team to change vehicles twice, not with dramatic swaps, but with mundane transitions: a brief stop at a late-night garage, a handoff through a parking deck, a coat change, a different set of plates. He also considered the waitress. If she was an operator, she would report his escape, but reporting carried risk. A system that sold certainty punished uncertainty. An operator who lost a target became a liability, and liabilities were either tightened into obedience or erased. That meant she might soon become desperate enough to flip, or she might be forced to hunt him personally to prove value. Either way, Luca treated her as a future variable, not a savior. His people signaled, with tense posture, whether they should strike back immediately. Luca refused. Immediate retaliation would be loud, and loudness fed surveillance. He needed silence first, the kind that let him relocate remaining assets without broadcasting panic. He ordered a temporary freeze on any work that required predictable movement. He ordered funds shifted into dormant channels and prepared burn protocols for compromised accounts. Then he decided to weaponize the machine's assumptions. If it expected Luca to run toward old safe houses, he would move toward forgotten sanctuaries, where stone walls and old tunnels made data uncertain again. Inside the SUV, Luca took a breath he could not afford to look like a breath. He focused on information. He asked for updates through quick gestures and phone screens held low. His people showed him a map of movements, safe houses hit, routes compromised, one trusted courier missing. The machine's reach was deep. Someone had been feeding schedules and access points for months. Luca's mind returned to Serafina. His people displayed a grainy feed captured through a friendly camera near La Senorina. Serafina walked toward Marco Santori's sedan with composed confidence. She adjusted her hair, her posture polished. Then she reached the sedan and leaned toward the window. A man stepped out behind her, moving too close. His hand hovered near her back, not protective, controlling. Serafina's confidence cracked, a flicker visible even in low resolution. The sedan door opened, and Serafina disappeared inside. The sedan drove away. Luca felt no satisfaction. Betrayal rarely ended with a winner, it ended with rearranged victims. Serafina had traded Luca's trust for a reward, and the reward looked like captivity. He forced his attention away from her image. Sentiment was a hook. Someone had used her as a hook to pull him into the command center. Someone would use her again if he let them. Luca ordered his driver to take a route that avoided predictable streets and cameras he knew were compromised. They moved toward the docks, weaving through narrow roads where warehouses cast long shadows. Luca used the time to construct a counterplan. He did not plan revenge first. He planned leverage. Machines collapsed when their inputs broke, when their dependencies failed, when their confidence turned into hesitation. He needed a safe gathering point, but safe houses were burned. He needed somewhere old, overlooked, and hard to surveil. He chose an abandoned church near the water, a place once used for smuggling during wars that had taught men to hide under sanctuaries. The church had tunnels, multiple exits, and thick stone walls that muffled sound. It also had symbolism, and symbols mattered because they pulled people back from fear. When they arrived, Luca's remaining core was already gathering, summoned by coded messages sent through channels too old-fashioned for the machine to monitor. People moved through the church's basement with disciplined urgency, setting radios, checking weapons, sealing doors. Faces were grim. Some were bruised. Luca recognized the cost of the night in their eyes. He laid out what he had seen, using maps and sketches on paper rather than screens. He described the command center, the monitors, the files, the way the system sold positioning. He did not mention the waitress's name because he did not know it, and because names were weak points. He described her role as an operator, an embedded guide. His people understood. Luca then shifted the room's focus from loss to action. He explained that attacking Marco Santori directly would be expected, and expectation was a trap. Instead he would attack the machine's arteries, the data brokers, the payment routes, the technicians who maintained camera access, the corrupt officials who traded authority for comfort. If those arteries collapsed, the command center would choke. He assigned roles, not with speeches, but with brief directives and eye contact that carried trust. He sent teams to seize ledgers, intercept couriers, and pressure intermediaries quietly. He instructed others to plant false routes and staged conversations, feeding the machine bad data until it began to doubt its own certainty. As dawn approached, Luca stood alone for a moment at the church's broken window, watching gray light spread over the water. His city looked peaceful from here, almost innocent. Somewhere in it, Serafina sat in a moving car, realizing too late that betrayal never purchased freedom. Somewhere deeper, the waitress returned to the command center, facing consequences for letting Luca slip. Luca did not allow himself to imagine their emotions. He allowed himself only one thought, clear and hard. The machine had tried to turn him into a piece. Now he would turn it into debris. The first rule Luca taught new recruits was that power did not come from violence. Violence was only a language. Power came from controlling what people believed would happen next. The machine under the city had nearly taken that control from him by selling predictions as products. Luca's response would not be a loud war. It would be a quiet one that poisoned the machine's confidence until it collapsed under its own certainty. In the church basement, he rebuilt his network the way he rebuilt a burned-out dock, with redundancy, misdirection, and patience. Radios were tuned to old frequencies. Couriers moved on foot through routes that did not appear on modern traffic maps. Meetings happened in rooms with no cameras and under roofs that blocked signals. Luca ordered his people to stop using phones entirely except for one purpose, to send bait. He created bait that looked like panic. He staged hurried movements near one of his known safe houses, deliberately visible to street-level watchers. He allowed one compromised courier to carry a message that suggested Luca would flee the city by sea. He leaked a shipping manifest through a corrupt clerk he knew the machine watched. Every piece of bait was designed to be believable because it carried just enough truth. Luca did intend to move by water, but not to escape. While the machine's attention pulled toward the docks, Luca attacked its arteries elsewhere. A team intercepted a mid-level technician who maintained camera access for private clients. The technician's home computer contained login tokens and a list of clients who paid for specific blind spots. Luca's people copied the data and left the computer untouched, because disappearance would trigger alarms. Another team hit a money runner on a routine route and swapped the runner's cash bag with one that contained a tracking bead and a false ledger. The runner returned home believing nothing had happened, and the machine accepted the bag as normal. By the second night, Luca could see the machine's shape. It was not a single organization. It was a market. Brokers sold feeds, officials sold response times, private security firms sold muscle, and Marco Santori stood at the center as a curator of transactions. Santori never needed to order a murder directly, he only needed to offer someone a map of where to stand. Luca's misinformation began to work. His watchers reported that patrol patterns near the docks were shifting as if someone had rerouted them. Unknown vehicles appeared at intersections, idling with headlights off. A drone hovered once above the harbor and then vanished. The machine had swallowed the bait and was moving pieces into position. Luca prepared his own position. He chose the abandoned grain warehouse at Pier 9 as the stage. The warehouse looked dead from outside, but inside its upper levels contained old catwalks, hidden niches, and 2 tunnel exits that led into the seawall. Luca's people set up observation points, jammed local signals, and placed smoke canisters that could flood the space if needed. They did not place explosives. Luca wanted control, not rubble. At midnight, the bait arrived. A convoy of black vehicles rolled toward Pier 9 in a pattern that revealed training, not street bravado. They parked in a crescent, leaving the warehouse door framed in headlights. People moved out, weapons low, scanning angles. Luca watched from the catwalk above, his breathing slow, his mind focused. This was not a rival crew. This was contracted force. Marco Santori arrived last, stepping out of a sedan with calm elegance. He wore a tailored coat and gloves, and he moved like a person convinced the world negotiated with him. He did not look up at the catwalks. He looked at the warehouse door as if expecting Luca to walk out and kneel. Another car arrived behind Santori's sedan. The passenger door opened, and Serafina stepped out. She looked smaller under warehouse lights, her confidence dulled, her posture controlled by the men around her. Her hands were empty. Her face remained composed, but Luca recognized strain around her eyes, the faint swelling near one cheek as if someone had gripped her too hard. Santori did not glance at her with affection or gratitude. He treated her like a receipt. Luca felt the old impulse to interpret her expression, to imagine regret. He killed the impulse immediately. Regret did not undo betrayal. Regret did not resurrect dead people. Serafina was here for one reason: leverage. Santori wanted Luca to reveal himself to save her, or to watch her suffer and therefore lose control. Either outcome served Santori. Luca did not reveal himself. Instead, he triggered the first phase of his plan. A jammer activated, disrupting nearby signals and causing vehicle radios to crackle with static. At the same moment, two of Luca's teams moved along the seawall tunnels, emerging behind the convoy. They did not fire. They cut tires silently with blades and placed magnetic trackers under bumpers. They turned mobility into a trap without creating noise. Inside the warehouse, Luca's people released smoke from hidden canisters, not thick enough to blind completely, but thick enough to soften aim and force hesitation. Hesitation was where control returned. Santori's hired force tightened formation, pulling Serafina closer to the vehicles. Santori remained calm, but Luca saw a change in his posture, a slight shift of shoulders, the first sign that the night was not going to follow the script Santori bought. Luca moved along the catwalk and used a spotlight mounted high above to wash the warehouse floor with harsh white light. The beam pinned Santori's group in sudden visibility while leaving Luca's upper level in shadow. It was the opposite of an ambush. It was exposure. Santori tilted his head, searching for the source of control. Luca stayed unseen. Then Luca played the second bait, the one meant for the machine, not for Santori. On a portable monitor in the warehouse corner, Luca's people streamed a live feed of the underground command center, captured through credentials stolen from the technician and routed through a secure line. The feed showed operators scrambling, alarms pulsing, screens flickering. Someone inside was trying to regain control of camera networks and radio relays. The machine was beginning to realize it had been infiltrated. Among the operators, the Waitress appeared on screen. She moved through the command center with sharp urgency, hands flying over keys. A guard stepped toward her. She pivoted and forced him back with a weapon drawn, then returned to the console. Luca understood immediately. She had been punished for losing Luca, and she had chosen a new side to survive. She was feeding Luca access. The live feed was a message to Santori. It showed that Luca could see the machine. It showed that Luca could touch it. It forced Santori to confront a rare discomfort: uncertainty. Santori's contractors began to spread, searching for the source of the broadcast. Luca let them. Spread formations were weaker formations. Luca then delivered the final pressure. His accountants, working through dormant channels, initiated a cascade of frozen transfers and flagged payments that Santori's shell companies relied on. The machine ran on money as much as data. When money hesitated, loyalty hesitated. Somewhere across the city, officials who had been paid to look away began to look at their phones and realize payments were delayed. Private security firms began to question whether contracts were still funded. Technicians began to unplug from risk. Santori sensed it. He turned slightly, scanning his men's faces as if reading cracks. Serafina watched the shifting tension with widening eyes. She realized, too, that Santori's protection was not infinite. Her posture tightened, and Luca saw the old performance trying to return, the attempt to become valuable again. Luca did not move for her. He moved for the machine. His tunnel team triggered a flare outside the warehouse, a bright burst that drew attention to the seawall. Santori's contractors pivoted toward the light. In that pivot, Luca's people advanced from behind, weapons raised but still silent. They surrounded the convoy without firing a shot. Santori was now in position, but it was Luca's position. Luca descended from the catwalk using a ladder hidden behind stacked pallets. He stepped into the smoke and walked forward with controlled pace. The contractors reacted, weapons lifting, but their angles were compromised by their own vehicles and by Luca's teams closing in. Santori's eyes locked onto Luca in the shifting haze, and for the first time Luca saw something like surprise. Luca stopped at a distance that kept him safe but visible. He did not speak. He did not need to. His presence was a statement that the machine's predictions had failed. Santori's posture remained composed, but his eyes flicked toward the monitor with the command center feed. He was calculating loss. Luca's people moved in closer, disarming the nearest hired shooters with swift, controlled motions. Some resisted and were forced to the ground. Most did not. They were contractors. Contractors cared about survival more than pride. Serafina stood near the sedan, trapped in the shifting geometry. Luca did not look at her for a long time. When he finally did, he saw fear, not for him, but for herself. The fear was honest. It was the first honest thing she had shown him in months. Luca turned away again. He stepped toward the warehouse door and signaled for Santori to be taken, not killed. Killing Santori would create a martyr for the market. Luca wanted a collapse, not a replacement. He wanted to expose the machine's client list, its payment routes, its surveillance keys. He wanted to make every buyer of certainty afraid that certainty could be bought back. As Luca's people secured Santori, the command center feed flickered. The waitress on screen pulled a data drive from a console and ran toward an exit. Behind her, guards chased. The feed cut out. Luca understood the cost. She had chosen to burn the machine from inside, and the machine would try to erase her. Whether she survived was unknown. Luca did not romanticize it. He simply acknowledged it as a choice made in a world that rarely allowed clean choices. By dawn, Santori's market was already unraveling. Luca's people delivered evidence to select officials who feared exposure more than they feared Luca. Payments froze. Cameras went dark. Contracts dissolved. The city's hidden network began to eat itself, each link severing the next to avoid being blamed. Luca returned to the church basement and watched as people breathe again, not in relief, but in the cautious way survivors breathe after a storm. He knew the machine was not fully dead. Markets never died entirely. They changed hands, learned new disguises, found new servers. But Luca had reclaimed something essential, the ability to decide what happened next. When he finally allowed himself to think of Serafina, he did so without anger. He saw her as a lesson he had paid for, and he refused to pay twice. He left her fate in the hands of the people who had purchased her betrayal. He did not rescue her. He did not punish her. He removed her from the center of his story. He ordered new protocols immediately. No lover would sit near his ledgers again. No route would repeat twice. Every meeting would have 2 exits and a third that only he knew. He created a small fund for families harmed during the night, not from charity, but from discipline. Loyalty grew where compensation appeared without being demanded. He also set aside one empty safe house, untouched, reserved for the waitress if she ever resurfaced alive and willing. The city outside continued to glow with morning light, pretending it had not witnessed any of it. Luca Moretti stood in the broken church and accepted the truth that ruled his life. Neutral ground was a myth. So was safety. Only position mattered, and Luca intended to hold it.